August Sunday and to share a message together. And I think what I'm going to share in a way is does follow on nicely from JL's session in one way, specifically as he talked about Jesus essentially being your coach. And for me, when I reflect on 2021, that was a year, literally today, I think we had my dad's funeral, a memorial. So that was the year it just started, started with a bang of, terrible things. And then it was this year of, for me, it felt like a year of learning. It was fascinating. Because the big message I got out of my dad was, I want to be like he is at the end, and he was wanting to be like Jesus was, to be selfless and caring and giving and loving, and in a way, I look back in 21 and almost felt like grade one. But what was interesting for me is exactly what JL said, is keep asking Jesus to be your teacher, so that he would put things into my mind that I needed to look at. And then more than that, keep fighting me on the thing that I'd said I wanted, because often you have New Year's resolutions. You say, yeah, this year I am going to be, happier, or this year I'm going to do X, whatever it might be, and by January the 2nd, which is who we are, the resolution's gone. And that's human. The only way it works, and I like Joel actually used a phrase there, Jesus is not only the content, he's the coach, and that's what the word of God is. When you suck it into you, it's a living thing, and it becomes the content and the coach. You need that. Otherwise, what happens is, as you're in life, you forget, and that's when you need to, at the cold phase, when you need to be reminded. Maybe it's patience. I'm going to be more patient, but then the situation arrives and patience is gone. So how do you deal with that? The only way is to ask the coach to say, okay, you're in me. And as I'm losing it, he's like, oh, yes. You need that reminder. And that's really, so the lesson I want to share today is one of the key ones I believe I've tried to learn over this last year. And again, I don't think I've got it right, but I get this nagging voice. And if I have one complaint about the lesson, is the nagging voice. Every time I want to do the thing that I'm going to talk about, you get the voice in your head and you're like, okay, which is excellent because that's what you want. So if you had to look back on last year, 2021, and I mean, there's been all the dramas of 2021, and interesting, I saw someone shared an image of 2021, and what they had is they had 2020 and they had a picture of a virus, 2021 and they had a picture of a vaccine injection, and then 2022 they had sunshines and flowers and whatever. And I'm just thinking, when 2023 comes, we'll probably have another bad image to go for 2022, because you hear this every year. You get to the end of the year and they'll be like, oh, come on, well, I'm so glad that year's over. It's a new year. And you go through the cycle. But every year does have issues. So, and there's certain things that really, were pet hates and complaints of ours just through the year. So if you have to think about 2021, and one thing that, this was probably my biggest complaint about 2021 was, or the biggest irritation of 2021 for me was this. Anyone want to suggest something that really...
South Africa being blamed for Omicron.
Okay, so there's a big one. So that became a big... South Africa being blamed for Omicron versus festive holidays. Any other major complaints for 21?
Incessant discussions about COVID.
Okay, incessant discussions about COVID. Okay.
Same thing.
Oh, the looting, that was another irritating one, and that pulled a lot of our conversation, definitely, for a period of time, especially those who are close to it.
Corrupt politicians.
Yeah, corrupt politicians. So, I mean, there's an endless list, and for each of us, some are very common, like we've just mentioned, the Omicron thing, obviously politics and crime, they feature all the time, but there are some new ones that come in through the years. Right, so I want to talk about something that Jude wrote, and this particular thought that came to me didn't start with this verse, but when I saw this verse, I was even more horrified, because it started with another verse, and then when I started to look at the theme, I came back to this previous verse. Jude writes about the time we're living in, and he talks about this, the ungodliness that we're going to have in this world. So I'll read Jude 1:14. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone and to convict them of all the ungodly acts they have committed in their ungodliness, and of all the defiant words ungodly sinners have spoken against him. So there's a lot of ungodly there. Okay, and then he lists them. He lists the ungodly acts. So God's coming back. He's going to judge the ungodly. If you had to, and he's got a list. In fact, I think he's got three. The top top 3 ungodly things that Jesus is coming back to judge. If you had to, for those who, besides those I've already spoken to, if you had to list what you think Jude's going to come up as the top 3 ungodly things that Jesus is coming back to judge, what would you put in that list? Sorry? Pride, okay. Drunkenness, yeah. Greed, laziness. Idolatry, probably sexual immorality, hatred. Okay, those are all, they've got the big ones, you know, that we talk about. Okay. Well, he gives us the top 3. And the reason I asked you all for what you didn't like about 2021 is by answering that question, we've all put ourselves into the list. Here we go. These people, talking about the ungodly, are, number 1, idolaters. No, these people are grumblers and fault finders. They follow their own evil desires. They boast about themselves and flatter others with their own advantages. Number 1 definition of ungodly is a complainer. And I think, wow, I was like, what? Complainer. That's what he says. Top of the list. Ungodly, these people are complainers. Before he even says anything else, complainers. Just think about our world today. What a world of complainers. I mean, what is social media full of? People complaining about everything. You know, and you think about it, we've never lived in a time where we've got it better. I mean, filter coffee, rivers, Wi-Fi, entertainment, Netflix. You go back, World War I, World War II, go back further. Those guys lived in hard times, you know, and we are complaining. Now, they might have had a reason to complain because the thing came through, wiped out your crops, and you were going to starve to death. We complain when there's too many people in the queue at Woolworths. We complain when the Wi-Fi is off and my Netflix is not, or it's not streaming fast enough. And so God puts his finger on what people are going to look like in the last time. But the scary thing is, every one of us, and this is what hit me, are complainers. And so when he's talking about the ungodly, it's all very nice to see, oh, those hateful killers, those sexually immoral, those people. It says complainers. So now you got to ask yourself, do you complain? How much do you complain? How often do you complain? Because Jesus is coming back to get rid of complainers. And so by complaining, we put ourselves in this list. I'm going to give you what are probably the 6 most, and this is the verse I read, the 6 most ignored Bible words. These are the 6 most ignored Bible words by all unbelievers, obviously, but by all believers. These are probably the 6 most ignored Bible words by every Christian. Do everything without complaining and arguing. Do everything without complaining and arguing. Okay, so you can just, don't worry about any other Christian, ask yourself. Everything. Do everything without complaining and arguing. And so, we all, like every other human being. The government's ridiculous, can you believe? Or crime is unacceptable, I can't believe it. This is ridiculous. Why did they publish this thing about this stupid virus? Or my neighbor, he's parking in my thing. You should have seen the traffic. It was so irritating. Man, the weather's so hot today. It's so irritating. It's endless. I mean, literally, and as I become aware of it, you almost run out of conversation. We'll be walking to Berg River Dam. And on that beautiful day, we did the hike on the 1st. And I want to go, yes, it's hot. And I go, okay. That's complaining. I'm complaining. It's so integrated that even at the smallest level, we do it. We've learned to complain on everything, on every single layer. And so we have this verse that is ignored by all of us because it's something that touches all of us. But it's interesting. There's a specific word there I think that stands out. And it's not the word everything, because that in itself is a big thing. Do everything. He's not just saying, just do the big things without complaining. He's saying do everything without complaining. But the word I think is particularly important here is it's the word do everything. You see, the commandment is not do not complain. It is do everything without complaining. And that makes the command even more difficult, because this is actually a doing command. So this is not just saying, oh, well, don't complain about stuff. This is saying, I want you to be doing things and not complaining. Whew, now that's another layer. So it's one thing to say, I'm not going to complain about the hot sun, the long line, the irritating driver, the crime, the COVID. I want you to actually be doing and not complaining. And I think that becomes quite an interesting thing to consider, because when you look at complaining, it's quite a weird thing. And I was just trying to ponder it. Why do we complain? Okay, so let's say we're walking together in this Berg River and it's a hot day. Oh, it's so hot today. Okay, now I'm trying to understand. So why did I say those words? It's not going to change the heat. It's probably not going to make you feel any better, because now, even if you weren't aware of it, now you're thinking about the heat. It's making me think about the heat, and nothing's changed, but I'm going to say it anyway. Just take the Omicron thing. Okay, so they published those stupid results. Okay, so now we complain to each other. We're not changing anything. We're not changing what they've done. We're not going to go into government and make sure they don't do it anymore. We're just making everyone around us even more miserable by us sharing our misery, just in case they weren't thinking about it at that point. And we do this with every topic, whether it be crime, as I said, or the weather, whether it be the irritating driver or the queue we got to stand in. We complain about things that we actually have no intention of fixing, or we are unable to fix. And you think, well, that's crazy then. Why do we complain about stuff that we can't fix or do anything about, and all it's going to do is make everyone more miserable? And so it's this weird human condition. And so the nation of Israel, and you think that they had a good reason to complain. So we're sitting here under forest, it's nice. The nation of Israel went on a big hike. So for those of you who don't know, they came out of Egypt, and God said to them, guys, I've got a new house for you. You go, yeah, new house for us. So it's just over there. And so they all come, and it's like 3 million of them. Well, I don't know how many, millions of them. They got your little goats and sheep and little babies. Now, for those of you going on a hike, like we did the other day, and it's hot, it's not so pleasant, we complain. Well, you're going with everything. You're carrying your tents, and there's not like little light tents. You're carrying your little baby goats, so your big goats can walk by themselves, but you're carrying babies, and you're hiking. And now you've just got out of Egypt. The Egyptians have wanted to kill you. You just got through that, and you're on the other side, and now you go. And then the bad news breaks somewhere along the line for various reasons. No, this hike's going to be a bit longer than you expected. It's actually going to be from start to end 40 years. 40. Yeah, it'll be 40 years long, and you'll be going through the desert. And now the root just goes, God's punishing them because they grumbled against him. Anyway, so they just go, and then you get thirsty, and it's really, and then you get water, and now you're dying of thirst. And so what do you do if you're dying of thirst? You complain, obviously. And then, God was bright. Or you're starving because you're in the desert. You can't grow stuff. And so you grumble and you need food. Those are legitimate reasons. 1 Corinthians 10, do not grumble as some of them did of old, talking about them in the desert, and were killed by the destroying angel. That was God's response to people grumbling in a situation where you would have thought, well, it's sort of okay to grumble then. So complaining is something that God does not tolerate. James 5. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. It's very strong language. And the more I looked at it, I was like, yo, because it's something you don't think about, because it's something that you just think is, what does it matter? And so why is it such a problem? I was thinking, well, why is complaining such a problem? And it's especially a problem for us, like it was for the children of Israel, who believe that God leads us. The children of Israel are being led by God. And when they complained, who are they complaining against? They're complaining against the one who leads them. And if we believe God leads us in every aspect of our life, through the hot day, the cold day, through the business failing, through the COVID thing, through the line that's too long, if we believe God is in every detail and we're complaining, we're moaning about him and what he's doing in our life. So we complain because the queue's too long, because he was trying to save you from an accident. You're complaining because of that. You're complaining because of the heat, whatever it may do. But we say, you lead my life, but we complain. And so I think it reflects poorly on our view of God. And so Jude describes the godly as they are clouds without rain, blown along by the wind. What does he mean by that? Well, he's saying these complainers are all, it's like you see this cloud, but it never brings rain. That's what complainers are. With lots of words, zero action. And I was reflecting on this for a while, like we'll complain and say, there's too much crime or there's too many potholes in the road or whatever. And we are like that. We're these clouds that make a lot of noise, make a lot of thunder, but there's never any rain. And actually, if you take the word complain, you can just do a little bit of surgery on it and you can fix it. And the problem with complain is it's got an I in it. You've got to get rid of that. This is I don't like, I'm complaining, I'm hot, I'm cold, I'm this. Take out that I. Okay, that's the first thing you do. You've got to put another little letter into it, which is the letter E. We'll come to that in a moment. And just give it a bit of space. And complain becomes complan. And if we can have that mindset of not to complain, but to complan, everything changes. So for everything that is a misery in our life, if there's something you could do about it, do it. Even whether it be crime. You might not be able to fix all your crime, but you can work in people and give them a better life. We can complain about many things, but if we change that a little bit in our lives from complain to complan, things can change so beautifully. Complan ways to love. Complan ways to bring joy. Complan how to bring peace. Proverbs says, those who plan what is good find love and faithfulness. And so stopping complaining isn't an optional thing, as we've seen. It's the top of the ungodly list. And we're told do everything without complaining. And it's interesting, that verse that says do everything without complaining comes from Philippians. Look at the context of what Philippians is about. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. And then we read, do everything without complaining. He's talking about a salvation issue here. Complaining is at the heart of salvation. It's not an optional because of how it reflects on God. And so he asks us to not be like the ungodly. And so the antidote to being on the ungodly list is to be on the godly list. And the way we do that is to not complain and to bring praise to God. But how do we do it? How is it possible? Because when I'm hot, when I'm in the queue and I've stubbed my toe, I can't remember. And this was my problem. I can't remember to not complain. And he tells us the answer. This is what has to be put into the complain. That little E that has to change complain to complain is eternity. It's only if the divine comes into us. And he says, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. And so the bottom line is the only way we change complaining to something positive is we let God come into us. And so if we want an example, I suppose there's no greater example than Jesus. Here is Jesus. You think if you had a reason to complain, he should have complained. Because he spent all this time, he's preaching and he's got all these converts and it's going well. And he gets to the end of his ministry and they just bolt, bang, they're gone. And then he gets arrested and then they beat him and everyone mocks and they're taking him to the cross to crucify him. And when he looks down, there's like 3 people there from the hundreds. Literally days before, there were crowds going, yay, and putting palm trees down. Yeah, we love you. Awesome. And bang, there's no one there. And you think he would complain. You complain when you've been beaten, when you've got nails in your hand, you can't breathe and there's no one there. And we read about Jesus and it says he was like a sheep to the slaughter. As a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. And that was the key. He didn't open his mouth. But it's not just about complaining. We often think about what I mustn't do. It's like telling a kid, don't steal the cookie, or you're telling someone, don't think about the elephant with blue spots. Don't, Caleb, think about the elephant with blue spots. Don't, elephant blue spots. No, it's a ridiculous thing. Don't think about it. Okay, and the more you tell people don't think, they think about it. So what's the opposite? Well, here is the antidote. Ephesians 5:20. Give thanks for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Wow, that's what we got to do. So when you want to complain about the heat, when you want to complain about the crowds, when you want to complain about anything, there is always a reason to give thanks. Absolutely always a reason. Sing praises over everything, says Ephesians 5:20 in the Message Bible. Any excuse for a song to God the Father in the name of our Master Jesus Christ. Any excuse. Probably the thing that kickstarted this particular message for me was a book that my brother comes from Benin, Stephen, some of you might know. Wherever he comes from now, Cameroon, he's always on the move. Recommended. Now, probably outside of the Bible, this is probably the book that's had the biggest impact on me, called The Hiding Place. It is the most astounding story, and I keep hearing the message come over my head of things in it. And Kayla actually mentioned this. I just want to read you a part, and you mentioned it as well in a message earlier in the last year, I think it was. But I just think this thing was so powerful. And every time I want to complain, I think about this and I go, man, this is incredible. And so I'm going to read it to you. So it's the book, The Hiding Place, by Corrie ten Boom. And if you don't know the story, they're Dutch. Well, they're Dutch, yes. They're Dutch people who, when Nazi Germany invaded, they were in their little home, but they started hiding Jews. They were hiding the Jews. They got caught, and they all got stuck in the concentration camps. Okay, and it's quite a traumatic story because lots of them end up dying. But anyway, Corrie ten Boom writes the story about her and her sister who end up in a concentration camp in Germany. And it's just horrific conditions. I mean, next door to them, they're burning the bodies while part of the concentration camps. So every day you can smell their bodies burning. The men's camps next door, you hear the guns, executions. It's just horrific. Okay, so Corrie and her sister Bessie have been imprisoned, and they in the concentration camps. So this is what they write on one particular part. Barracks 8 was in the quarantine compound. Next to us, perhaps in a deliberate warning to newcomers, were located the punishment barracks. From there, all day long, and often in the night, came the sounds of hell itself. They were not the sounds of anger or of any human emotion, but of a cruelty altogether detached, blows landing in regular rhythm, screams keeping pace. We would stand in our 10-deep ranks with our hands trembling at our sides, longing to jam them against our ears to make the sound stop. It grew harder and harder. Even within these four walls, there was too much misery, too much seemingly pointless suffering. Every day, something else failed to make sense. Something else grew too heavy. Yet in the midst of the suffering, these two women, Corrie and her sister Bessie, are in their barracks, and they're in a terrible barracks within this terrible situation. And so they moved to what's called Barrack 28. And so Corrie, she's horrified when she first gets to these barracks because it's reeking, and all the straw beds are swarming with fleas. It's an absolute horrendous place, and she doesn't know how they're going to even survive this. And so she's complaining to her sister Bessie that, man, can it get any worse than this? And this is a terrible situation. And Betsy discovers God's answer. Rejoice always, Betsy says. Pray constantly. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus. That's it, Corrie, says Bessie. That's his answer. Give thanks in all circumstances. That's what we can do. We can start right now to thank God for every single thing about this new barracks. I stared at her. This is Corrie speaking. Then around me at the dank, foul-aired room. They thanked God for the fact that they were together. They thanked God that they had a Bible. They even thanked God for the horrible crowds of prisoners that were people all around them. And then Betsy thanked God for the fleas. The fleas, this was too much. Betsy, there is no way even God can make me grateful for a flea. Give thanks in all circumstances, she quoted. It doesn't say in pleasant circumstances. Fleas are part of this place where God has put us. And so we stood between tiers of bunks and gave thanks for the fleas. But this time I was sure Betsy was wrong. And it turned out that Betsy was not wrong. The fleas were a nuisance, but a blessing after all. And the women were able to have Bible studies in the barracks with a great deal of freedom, never bothered by the supervisors coming in and harassing them. They finally discovered that it was the fleas that kept the guards out. Though through these fleas, God protected the women from abuse and harassment. Dozens of desperate women were free to hear the comforting, hope-giving word of God. Through those fleas, God protected the women from much worse things and made sure they had their deepest, truest needs met. And so when I think of that, I think, wow, what do we complain about? We complain about the most trivial things. And there was this person saying, I'll even give thanks for the fleas, because you don't know why those fleas are there. especially if you believe God leads every aspect of your life. And so we all have fleas. Everything is a flea. And some fleas are really bad. And I don't think whatever your fleas are, they don't compare to what they were going through. Because every day they're waiting to be executed. But we all have fleas, that irritating itch. But what do we do with it? Do we tell everyone about it because it's going to somehow make us and everyone feel worse and put ourselves on the ungodly list? Or do we give thanks? Do everything without complaining and arguing. And so if the ungodly are recognized by complaining, then the godly are recognized by praise. Hebrews 13:15. Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name. You get those people who complain. You get those people who do but complain. You get those people who do and don't complain. And then you get those who do and rejoice. And what a high calling that is. How are we going to be recognized? And which one of those are we going to live? And so I leave you with 1 Corinthians 5, verse 16, because that's what we've come to do. We have come to celebrate the most amazing reason to rejoice. Because Jesus, who could have complained and said, I want to live in you and change you and give you a life despite the fleas that is going to be incredible. So as 2022 stretches ahead of us, there will be fleas. But as Paul says, rejoice always. The shortest verse in the Bible, very succinct. And that's the message we come to celebrate. So let's make 2022, regardless of what happens, a year where we rejoice always.